The National Security Council meeting in the Situation Room was supposed to be routine. March 2025, 3 months into Trump's second term. The agenda: reviewing options for responding to Iranian-backed militia attacks on American positions in Iraq and Syria. Nothing had changed fundamentally since Trump's first term. Iran continued testing American resolve through proxy forces. America continued calibrating responses to send messages without triggering full-scale war. But Trump's patience with calibration had limits. "We keep doing these pinprick strikes," Trump said, frustration evident in his voice. "Hit a weapons depot here. Take out a commander there. And what does it accomplish? They attack us again 2 weeks later. Maybe it's time to hit them hard enough that they actually stop. Make them understand there are real consequences." Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, eager to demonstrate hawkish credentials, leaned forward. "Mr. President, we have target packages that would significantly degrade Iranian capability. Military installations. IRGC command centers. Missile production facilities. If we wanted to send a message that couldn't be misunderstood, we have the capability to do so." National Security Advisor Mike Waltz added, "The Iranians have been escalating for months. At some point, restraint gets interpreted as weakness. A strong response, surgical but significant, could reset the dynamic. Make clear that attacking American forces has costs they're not willing to pay." CIA Director, more cautious, noted, "We should consider Iranian counter-escalation options. They can't match us militarily, but they have asymmetric capabilities. Cyberattacks on infrastructure. Activation of sleeper cells. Closing the Strait of Hormuz. Accelerating nuclear enrichment. A major strike could trigger responses we'd have difficulty managing." Trump waved this off. "They always have counter-escalation options. That's the argument for never doing anything. I'm tired of being paralyzed by what Iran might do. Maybe it's time to be more concerned about what we will do." The discussion continued for 90 minutes. Hawks arguing for demonstrative force. Doves urging continued restraint and diplomatic channels. Trump clearly leaning toward the Hawks but not yet committed. Then something unusual happened. The meeting was interrupted by the White House Chief of Staff. "Mr. President, apologies for the interruption. Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso is in Washington for meetings at the World Bank. He's requested an urgent audience with you. Says it relates to current discussions about Iran. I wouldn't normally interrupt NSC for this, but his message was specific enough about timing that it seemed relevant." Trump looked annoyed. "The African guy? The one who told my people to go to hell on the gold deals?" "Yes, sir, that one. What does he know about Iran?" "He didn't say specifically, sir. Just that he had information relevant to decisions being considered today." Trump was curious despite himself. Traoré had proven to be unpredictable, intelligent, well-informed, willing to challenge American power directly. If he'd requested urgent meeting specifically about Iran, there might be substance worth hearing. "Fine. Bring him in. But this better not be a waste of time." 20 minutes later, Traoré was escorted into the Situation Room. He wore his standard olive military uniform with red beret, looking distinctly out of place among the suits and military dress uniforms of the American national security establishment. Trump made brief introductions. "Captain Traoré, you know some of these people from various confrontations." There was slight edge to Trump's tone. "You said you had information about Iran. We're in the middle of discussing response options to Iranian-backed attacks. So what do you know that we don't?" Traoré was direct. "Mr. President, I don't know what you don't know. But I know what I do know. And I thought it might be relevant to whatever you're considering, which is, Burkina Faso has relationships with various countries including some that America doesn't engage with directly. Iran is one of them. Not deep relationship, we're not allies. But we have communication channels. And those channels have been active recently. Specifically, Iranian officials have been asking about American military posture and decision-making processes. They're trying to assess whether the Trump administration is likely to launch major strikes on Iranian territory." The room was silent. Trump leaned forward. And what are you telling them? Nothing. We don't share intelligence about American decision-making with anyone. But the fact that they're asking suggests they're genuinely concerned about the possibility. Which means they're planning responses. And I thought you should know what some of those responses might be before you make decisions. Defense Secretary Hegseth interjected, "With respect, Captain, we have our own intelligence on Iranian response planning. I'm not sure what Burkina Faso's channels add to what we already know." Traoré turned to him calmly. "Secretary Hegseth, your intelligence on Iranian planning is very good. I'm sure it covers military responses, proxy activations, cyber capabilities, all the standard options. What I'm offering is different. I'm offering information about what Iranian officials say to countries they don't consider adversaries. The conversations they have when they're not being guarded because they assume the information won't reach Washington. Those conversations are sometimes more revealing than what your intelligence services intercept." Trump was intrigued. So what are they saying in these unguarded conversations? They're terrified of major American strikes. Not because of the immediate damage, they accept that American military capability is overwhelming. But because they believe major strikes would force them to respond in ways that escalate beyond anyone's control. And they've been specific about what some of those responses would be. Traoré paused, then continued. First, they would immediately accelerate nuclear weapons development. Not just enrichment, actual weaponization. They assess that if America is willing to launch major strikes on Iranian territory, the only deterrent that matters is nuclear capability. So restraints that have kept them below weaponization threshold would be abandoned. Second, they would activate every proxy force and sleeper network they have. Not just in Iraq and Syria, everywhere. Hezbollah would launch everything they have at Israel. Houthi attacks on Saudi infrastructure would intensify dramatically. Attacks on American facilities globally, not just in the Middle East. They've been building these capabilities for years. Major American strikes would be the trigger to use them all simultaneously. Third, they would attempt to close the Strait of Hormuz. Not just threaten, actually attempt it. Mining. Anti-ship missiles. Swarm attacks on tankers. They know they can't keep it closed indefinitely against American naval power. But they can create enough chaos to spike oil prices, disrupt global markets, and inflict economic costs that pressure America's allies to demand de-escalation. The national security team was listening intently now. This wasn't theoretical analysis. This was specific operational planning. Fourth, and this is the one that should concern you most, they would go after American homeland directly. Not necessarily with Iranian forces, that's too attributable. But with capabilities they've cultivated specifically for this scenario. Cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. Power grids. Financial systems. Water treatment. Not espionage or intelligence gathering. Destructive attacks designed to create civilian casualties and economic damage. They believe that's the only way to change American domestic political calculus, make the costs of military action visible and painful to American voters. The room was completely silent. The CIA director spoke first. "Captain Traoré, how reliable is this information?" "Very reliable. It comes from conversations with Iranian officials who believe they're speaking to non-aligned partners who won't share with Washington. They're not posturing or sending messages. They're genuinely trying to understand American intentions so they can prepare responses. The specific operational details I've described were shared as part of explaining why they're so concerned about American escalation. They want countries like Burkina Faso to understand that major conflict would have global implications, hoping we'll communicate that to anyone who might influence American decision-making." Trump asked the obvious question, "Why are you sharing this with us? You've made very clear that you don't align with American preferences. You've rejected our business proposals. You've publicly challenged our foreign policy. Why warn us about Iranian response planning?" Traoré's answer was straightforward. "Mr. President, I don't align with American preferences when they conflict with Burkina Faso's interests. But I also don't want to see a catastrophic war that would destabilize the entire global system including Africa. Iranian descriptions of their response planning aren't bluffing. They're genuinely prepared to do these things if they believe their survival requires it. And if they do them, the consequences won't be contained to the Middle East. Global oil markets would be chaos. Cyberattacks on American infrastructure could cascade to systems worldwide. Nuclear proliferation accelerates. The entire regional order collapses. None of that serves Burkina Faso's interests. So even though I don't align with American foreign policy generally, I have strong interest in preventing decisions that would trigger this specific catastrophe. That's why I'm here. National Security Advisor Waltz, skeptical, pushed back. This could be Iranian information warfare. Using you to deliver warnings designed to deter us from actions Iran fears. How do we know this isn't manipulation? You don't know for certain. But ask yourself. What's Iran's incentive to have me deliver exaggerated warnings to you? If anything, making you believe their response would be devastating increases likelihood you'll strike preventively before they can prepare those responses. The logical Iranian strategy would be to downplay their capabilities, not emphasize them. The fact that they're being specific about catastrophic responses suggests they genuinely want to deter major strikes, not provoke them. CIA director nodded slowly. That logic is sound. And it aligns with some of our intelligence. We've seen Iranian civil defense preparations and military repositioning consistent with expecting major attacks. This adds detail to patterns we've observed but couldn't fully interpret. Trump sat back, processing. The meeting's entire dynamic had shifted. 90 minutes of debate about target packages and message sending had been reframed by 10 minutes of information about consequences that extended far beyond the immediate military exchange. Finally, Trump spoke. Captain Traoré, let me ask you something. You came here to warn us about catastrophic escalation. But you've also criticized American military presence in the Middle East and Africa. You've argued that we should withdraw, let regions manage their own affairs. If you believe that, why do you care if we get into a war with Iran? Wouldn't that accelerate American withdrawal from the region? Mr. President, I want American withdrawal from interference in African affairs. I don't want American withdrawal through catastrophic war that destabilizes the entire global system. There's a difference between deliberate strategic reorientation and chaotic collapse triggered by conflict spiraling out of control. The former could be managed. The latter would harm everyone including Burkina Faso. I'm capable of distinguishing between outcomes that serve my interests and outcomes that harm everyone including me. Trump almost smiled. You're a pain in the ass, Captain. You know that? I've been told that, sir. But you're an honest pain in the ass. Which is rare. Most people who come into this room tell me what they think I want to hear, or what serves their bureaucratic interests, or what protects their ass if things go wrong. You just told me things that serve your interests by preventing something you think would be catastrophic. I respect that. Trump looked around the table at his national security team. We're tabling the Iran strike planning for now. I want intelligence to verify what Captain Traoré has told us. Cross-reference it with what we're seeing. And I want options that respond to Iranian-backed attacks without triggering the escalation spiral he's described. We'll reconvene in 72 hours with better information and more precise options. The meeting ended shortly after. As Traoré was escorted out, Secretary of State Marco Rubio caught up with him in the corridor. Captain Traoré, that was either very brave or very foolish. You just walked into the American national security apparatus and told us things that could be interpreted as siding with Iran against American interests. Traoré stopped. Secretary Rubio, I told you things that serve my interests and incidentally might prevent catastrophic decisions that would harm American interests too. If you interpret preventing mutual catastrophe as siding with Iran, that says more about how you think about foreign policy than about my motivations. I don't side with Iran or America. I side with Burkina Faso. Sometimes that means warning both sides when they're about to do something catastrophically stupid. Rubio had no immediate response. Traoré continued to the exit. 20 minutes later, Trump called Mike Waltz into the Oval Office. "Mike, I want you to do something. Set up a secure back channel with Traoré. Not formal diplomatic channel, something quiet that lets us communicate when we need to without it being official US Burkina Faso engagement. That guy has sources we don't have. And more importantly, he'll tell us things our own people won't because he doesn't give a damn about protecting bureaucratic equity or staying in my good graces. That's valuable. More valuable than 10 yes men. Sir, he's been openly hostile to American interests, he's been openly honest about pursuing his interests, which happen to not always align with ours. But today his interests aligned with preventing catastrophe. And he came here to tell us that even though he knew we'd be suspicious of his motivations, that's someone worth staying in contact with. Set it up." The back channel was established within 48 hours. 72 hours after Traoré's Situation Room intervention, the National Security Council reconvened. The intelligence community had spent the intervening time cross-referencing his warnings with existing collection. The CIA director opened with the assessment. "Mr. President, we've verified substantial portions of what Captain Traoré told us. Iranian military repositioning, civil defense preparations, and communications patterns all consistent with expecting major American strikes and preparing the responses he described. We've intercepted Iranian discussions about nuclear weaponization timelines, proxy activation protocols, and Strait of Hormuz contingencies. The specificity matches our intelligence closely enough that we assess his sources have genuine access to Iranian strategic planning." Trump listened carefully. "So he wasn't bullshitting us?" "No, sir. If anything, he may have understated some aspects. Iranian response to major strikes would be even more comprehensive than he described." Defense Secretary Hegseth, who'd been most hawkish in the previous meeting, spoke next. "Mr. President, this doesn't mean we shouldn't respond. But it does mean we need to be more surgical. Target selection that degrades their capability without triggering catastrophic escalation. Narrower than we initially proposed, but still achievable." Trump nodded. "What changed your mind? 3 days ago you were ready to hit everything." "Honestly, sir. Captain Traoré's warning. Not because I trust him particularly, but because he had no reason to exaggerate Iranian capabilities. If anything, his interests would be served by us getting bogged down in another Middle East conflict. The fact that he came here to warn us suggests those consequences are real enough that even someone who doesn't like us wants to prevent them." The discussion continued for another hour. More restrained than the first meeting. The looming specter of Iranian catastrophic retaliation had fundamentally shifted the calculus. The military action eventually authorized was limited, precision strikes on specific Iranian facilities directly linked to recent attacks. Not the broad campaign under consideration. Not the message that couldn't be misunderstood. But enough to demonstrate willingness to respond while avoiding triggers Traoré had identified. The strikes were conducted 48 hours later. Iranian response was measured, angry rhetoric, proxy harassment, but nothing approaching the catastrophic escalation planned if America had gone with the broader campaign. The crisis de-escalated. 3 weeks later, Trump used the back channel established after the Situation Room meeting. The message was brief: your warning was accurate. The outcome was better than it would have been. I won't say thank you because that would suggest I'm grateful to you specifically. But I'll acknowledge that you prevented something that would have been bad for everyone. Traoré's response came 12 hours later: "Mr. President, I didn't do it for gratitude. I did it because catastrophic war serves nobody's interests including mine. But since we're acknowledging things, your restraint in limiting the strikes prevented the escalation spiral I warned about. That also counts for something. The exchange established something neither man would have predicted, a functional relationship based on mutual recognition of competence rather than alignment of interests. 4 months later, in July 2025, the backchannel was tested in reverse. Traoré reached out with urgent message: Mr. President, Russian officials are asking me questions that suggest they believe the United States is planning military operations against Russian positions in Libya or Sahel. If true, this could trigger escalation dynamics similar to what we discussed regarding Iran. If not true, I need to know so I can push back on Russian assumptions that might lead to preemptive actions. Trump convened a smaller group to discuss. Are we planning anything that would look like operations against Russian forces? National Security Advisor Waltz responded, not operations. But we have been increasing surveillance flights and positioning assets. Nothing approved. But preparatory steps might be visible and could be misinterpreted as imminent action. So Russians are seeing us prepare options and thinking we're about to act? Possibly, sir. Trump decided quickly. Tell Traoré we're not planning strikes. We're maintaining capability to respond if Russian actions threaten American interests, but no operations are imminent. If he shares that with Russian officials and it helps prevent them doing something stupid preemptively, that serves our interests. The message was sent. 48 hours later, Traoré responded, acknowledged. I've communicated to relevant parties that American posture is defensive capability maintenance, not offensive preparation. They remain skeptical but less immediately concerned. Appreciate the clarity. The backchannel continued to function over following months. Not frequently, perhaps once every 6 weeks. But when used, it was for substantive communication that served both parties' interests in avoiding catastrophic miscalculation. In September 2025, Trump faced another Iran decision point. Intelligence suggested nuclear enrichment advancing rapidly. Trump used the backchannel: Captain, need your assessment. Our intelligence shows Iranian enrichment advancing. We're considering response options. Before we decide, I want to know if your sources indicate Iranian intent to weaponize or if this is leverage for negotiations. And if we strike nuclear facilities specifically, would that trigger the catastrophic responses you described? Traoré's response was detailed: Mr. President, my sources indicate Iranian enrichment is primarily leverage for negotiations, not imminent weaponization. They believe threshold capability gives them deterrent without costs of actual weapons. However, if you strike nuclear facilities, that calculus changes instantly. They would interpret strikes on nuclear program as existential threat requiring weaponization as only reliable deterrent. So strikes designed to prevent weaponization would likely accelerate it. My assessment: if your goal is preventing Iranian nuclear weapons, military strikes are counterproductive. Trump shared the assessment with NSC. CIA confirmed it aligned with their analysis. State Department proposed renewed diplomatic engagement. Trump, persuaded that strikes would be counterproductive, authorized diplomatic approach instead. 2 months later, preliminary framework for negotiations was established. Not comprehensive, Trump wouldn't agree to anything resembling the JCPOA. But narrow understanding: Iran would cap enrichment at current levels, allow enhanced monitoring. In exchange, limited sanctions relief on humanitarian goods. Not peace. But managed competition that avoided catastrophic escalation. In December 2025, 10 months after the initial intervention, Trump called Traoré directly. Captain, wanted to tell you before you read it in press. We're announcing limited diplomatic framework with Iran tomorrow. Caps on enrichment, monitoring, narrow sanctions relief. Nothing comprehensive. But enough to prevent the crisis we discussed in March from recurring. Congratulations, Mr. President. Better outcome than military escalation would have produced. Yeah, well, you played a role in that. The information you provided in March changed how I thought about options. And follow-up in September confirmed strikes would be counterproductive. So this call is to acknowledge that your interference in American decision-making actually served American interests this time. Traoré laughed. Mr. President, I didn't interfere to serve American interests. I interfered to serve Burkina Faso's interests in avoiding catastrophic regional war. The fact that preventing catastrophe also served American interests is happy coincidence, not my primary motivation. I know that, Captain. That's exactly why your information was credible. You weren't trying to manipulate American decision-making to serve some agenda. You were trying to prevent outcome that would harm your interests and incidentally everyone else's. That kind of self-interested honesty is more valuable than allied loyalty that comes with hidden agendas. I appreciate that you understand the distinction, Mr. President. Most American officials assume anyone providing useful information must be trying to become an American asset. The idea that someone could provide useful information while remaining fundamentally uncommitted to American preferences seems to confuse them. Trump chuckled. You're still a pain in the ass about our business interests in Burkina Faso. And you're still trying to use American power to pressure favorable gold contracts. So we understand each other perfectly. I'll keep refusing your corrupt approaches. You'll keep trying to pressure me. And occasionally, when our interests in avoiding catastrophic war align, we'll communicate. That's more honest than most countries have with the United States. It's been productive, Captain. Which is better than pleasure in this business. Agreed, Mr. President. Productive is sufficient. 1 year after the Situation Room intervention, a journalist asked Traoré about his relationship with the Trump administration. Captain, you've been openly critical of Trump administration policy. Yet there are rumors you have some relationship with President Trump personally. Can you clarify? Traoré's response was calibrated. I have no relationship with President Trump in the sense of alliance or partnership. Burkina Faso's interests and American interests diverge on most issues. But occasionally, our interests in avoiding catastrophic outcomes align. When that happens, we communicate. That's not relationship. That's functional exchange of information between parties who recognize that some outcomes are bad for everyone. If you're asking whether I would warn the Trump administration about catastrophic risks even though I oppose their policy generally, yes. Because catastrophic war doesn't serve Burkina Faso even if it might weaken America. So you would help America avoid catastrophe while opposing American policy? I would help everyone avoid catastrophe including America. Because catastrophe doesn't stay contained. It spreads. It destabilizes systems Burkina Faso depends on. So preventing catastrophe serves my interests. If Americans interpret that as helping them, they're welcome to that interpretation. But they should understand, I'm helping myself. They benefit incidentally. Years later, analysts studying Trump's second-term foreign policy noted major decisions about potential military action were more restrained than his rhetoric suggested. The gap between threatening language and actual operations was wider in the second term than the first. One factor that wasn't publicly acknowledged was the back channel that provided unfiltered information about consequences from sources with no incentive to minimize risks. When asked about this years later, Trump's response was blunt: second term, I had better sources. Sources that would tell me when I was about to do something stupid because they didn't give a damn about my ego or their career advancement. You want to make good decisions? Get information from people who have no reason to lie to you. Even if those people don't like you. And Traoré, I prevented catastrophes that would have harmed Burkina Faso by harming the global system we're part of. If Americans benefited, good for them. But I wasn't helping Trump. I was helping myself. The fact that helping myself occasionally required preventing American catastrophes is just evidence that we live in an interconnected world where some outcomes harm everyone.